In this video, I'm going to show you how to program Mplus syntax. I'm going to use the example from Chapter 11 to program. I'm not going to spend much time explaining that example. You can read about it in the book. But basically, it's an RET for a program that was designed to influence social phobia. There's a treatment versus control dummy variable here on the left, and social phobia, the outcome, is here on the right. It's a latent variable with 3 indicators for it. The program is addressing 3 mediators, or trying to affect 3 mediators. One is negative cognitive appraisals. The second is perceived social skills. And the third is external locus of control. Again, you can read the chapter to get the details for it. It'll be useful to translate the influence diagram into a set of equations using the process I discuss in the book. And in this case, I'm going to focus on the structural variables, the structural part of the model. An endogenous variable is any variable that has an arrow going directly to it. And in this case, social phobia is an endogenous variable, so I'll have an equation for it. Negative appraisals is endogenous. Perceived social skills is endogenous, and external locus of control is endogenous. The treatment versus control variable is exogenous. The indicators of the latent variable are also technically endogenous variables, but I'm just going to focus on the structural aspects of the model. You specify an equation by taking a given endogenous variable and treating it as the outcome, and then it is assumed to be a linear function, all the variables with arrows pointing directly to it. So social phobia is a linear function of negative appraisals, perceived social skills, external locus of control, and the direct effect of the treatment versus control condition. In this diagram, in order for it not to be too cluttered, I'm not showing the covariates that I used in the example. Negative appraisals is an endogenous variable that is assumed to be influenced by the treatment versus control condition and by the mediator perceived social skills. Perceived social skills is influenced only by the treatment versus control variable, and external locus of control is influenced by or regressed onto perceived social skills as well as the treatment versus control dummy variable. Here are the equations down here. So this is negative cognitive appraisals, and it's regressed onto the treatment condition, perceived social skills, and then these are the covariates. NCA1 is the baseline measure of negative cognitive appraisals as measured at time 2. This is the equation for perceived social skills, external locus of control, and then for the latent social phobia variable. Okay, let's look at the Mplus syntax. I opened the Mplus editor and I typed in the syntax into that editor here. This appears exactly as it does in the book. I'm not going to go into as much detail as I do in the book about the syntax. I'm just going to kind of give you an overview here. Mplus has a set of key commands that ends in colons, and then it has subcommands that end in semicolons. A given line in the Mplus editor cannot be longer than 90 characters, including spaces. If your subcommand has more than 90 characters, just enter a carriage return before you reach 90 characters and continue typing on the following line. Mplus is not case sensitive, so you don't have to worry about that. And you can have as many spaces as you like between words. This first line is the title line, where you have the title command followed by a colon, and then you can put any text that you want after that. The semicolon on this line is optional. The next line is the data line, and it basically tells Mplus where the data file is that you want to analyze. You don't need apostrophes around the location. In this case, I've specified the full folder path plus the data file, which is chap11m.txt. If you don't specify the folder path, then Mplus will assume that the data are located in the same folder as wherever you've stored the input file. I use as a tag for the data file txt, but you can use any tag you want to. Some people use dat instead of txt. The data file typically is an ASCII file in free format, where the values for each variable are separated by a delimiter, usually a blank, a tab, or a comma. The numbers in the data file are arranged so that the first person scores on each variable appear first, followed by the second person's scores, and so on until the last person's scores are listed. Basically, the first person will be on the first line, the second person will be on the second line, the third person will be on the third line, and so on. Exported ASCII files for most software like SPSS or Stata is usually compatible with Mplus. Be sure not to write the variable names on the first line of the data file. Only numbers are valid in the data file. Next comes the variable command, and this tells Mplus what variables are in the data file. The names R subcommand lists the names of the variables in the order they're encountered in the data file. So for the first person, the first number that it encounters will be the ID variable. The next number it encounters will be the variable that you're labeling CR1, and then SPAI1, and so on, all the way through treat. Sometimes we only analyze a subset of the variables that we're reading in, and the use variables command is used to select out the variables that you're going to focus on. In this case, I'm analyzing all of the variables except the ID variable, so that's omitted. The names that you assign can be at most 8 characters, and again, they're space delimited. The missing line tells Mplus what values define missing data. In this case, I'm saying for all variables, if you encounter the number -9999, treat it as missing data. So I've set up my data file so that if I have missing data, it takes on the value of -9999. You can be more nuanced on this, but I'm not going to go into that. Take a look at the Mplus manual. The analysis command tells Mplus what kind of estimation strategy you want to use, and in this case I'm using robust maximum likelihood for the estimator. Notice here I have an exclamation point, and that signifies that the rest of the text on the line is a comment. Mplus essentially ignores the text after that, so you can add comments throughout, either on the same line as where you've put a command or on a separate line. The next command, model, tells Mplus you're going to tell it what the model looks like. The first thing I do is to specify the latent variables, and in this case I had 2 latent variables. I had the latent variable of social phobia at baseline, which I indicate as LSP1, and I have the latent variable for social phobia post-treatment, which I label as LSP3. You can use any labels that you want to, and again, Mplus is not case sensitive, but they can't be more than 8 characters long. A key model command in Mplus is the word by, and this basically says that I want the latent social variable of LSP1 to be indicated by the following indicators, and then I list the 3 variables that are going to be indicators of it. Mplus assumes that the first indicator listed is the reference indicator, and it'll fix its path at 1 relative to the latent variable. So in this case, I've specified my 2 latent variables and the indicators of them. Mplus by default sets the factor means equal to 0. The latent variable intercepts to 0. It estimates the measurement intercepts for the indicators. On this line, I'm going to override those defaults for reasons that I'll make explicit in later chapters. When I override the defaults, it's not going to affect the model fit or the other estimates for this type of model, and I'll make that clear in later chapters. When I put an endogenous variable in brackets, that refers to an intercept, and when I put an exogenous variable in brackets, it refers to a mean. So this is the measurement intercept for the reference indicator CR1 for the latent social phobia at baseline. This is the measurement intercept for the reference indicator CR3 for the latent social variable at time 3. Because the baseline latent social phobia is exogenous, this refers to the mean. And because the latent social phobia at time 3 is an endogenous variable, this refers to its intercept. Now in Mplus, the ampersand sign tells Mplus to fix the variable to the left of the sign to the value to the right of the sign. So I can read this as saying, take the intercept CR1 and fix it at the value of 0. So whereas Mplus normally estimates the measurement intercept, I'm going to override that and actually fix the intercept for the reference indicator at 0. I do the same thing for the reference indicator of the latent social phobia variable at post-test. Now again, you don't have to worry about these overrides in this particular chapter. They're not consequential at all. By listing the mean and the intercept of the latent social variables here, I'm basically telling Mplus I would like it to estimate those. The default is to fix them at 0, but I'm overriding that default and I'm telling them to estimate this mean and estimate this intercept. Notice that after this entry, I have in parentheses mean 1. The parentheses signify a label that I'm going to use to refer to these parameters later in the program. So I'm labeling this parameter mean 1, and I'm labeling this parameter intercept 1, int1. Next, I specify the core equations that I had shown you before. To do that, Mplus relies on the on command, which is right here. When you see the on command, it refers to a regression equation. The outcome variable is to the left of the on, and the predictor variables are to the right of the on. In this case, I'm going to regress the latent social phobia variable as measured after treatment onto the baseline latent social variable, the 3 mediators, the treatment condition, and then the other covariates. In this case, biological sex and hypercriticism on the part of the parents. Now I've added labels to each of the coefficients here, and I'll explain why I went to a second line here and specified this variable on this line in just a second. Now on this line I have a total of 6 predictors, so Mplus is going to be expecting 6 labels. The first predictor is labeled B10. The second predictor is going to be labeled P4, then P5, then P6, then P7, and then B11. And Mplus has a shorthand notation so that instead of having to write out P4, P5, P6, and P7, if I'm using the same label, but the end character is a number that increases by 1, I can use a shortcut and just specify those 4 labels as P4 through P7. And so this is going to be assigning those labels to these predictors. Now because I was getting close to the 90 character limit, I hit a carriage return, and I couldn't just continue on with the covariates because I've got the labels in between, and that will create a syntax error in Mplus. So what I do is I terminate the linear equation here, but then I specify the same equation, i.e. the same outcome, and the additional variables that I'm going to add, and the labels for those. Mplus, when it does the run, will essentially merge these into one linear equation. This is something I just had to do to deal with the 90 character limit and the fact that I'm assigning labels to the different predictors. Here's the equation for negap2, where the negative appraisals is regressed onto treatment and the 3 covariates, as well as perceived social skills. And then these are the labels for them that I'm going to use. Here's the equation for perceived social skills and for external locus of control. These equations basically map on to these guys here that I specified, and that's why I lay them out ahead of time. It's a roadmap for my Mplus programming. Now normally in Mplus you don't have to specify the correlations between the exogenous variables. Mplus automatically estimates them, although it doesn't formally incorporate them into the model. I discussed the reasons in another chapter and I don't want to get into them here. Basically, all the exogenous variables are treated as fixed predictors, and Mplus uses a fixed predictor form of regression. The bottom line is that normally you don't have to specify correlations. However, in this case, if you have an exogenous latent variable, then you do have to tell Mplus to estimate the correlation between it and the other exogenous variables in the system. If you do not, Mplus will assume those correlations are 0. The way you specify a correlation is with the with command. So this is saying take the latent social phobia variable at baseline, and correlate it with these other exogenous variables. Next, I specify the model indirect command, and this asks Mplus to do an extensive mediation analysis between two variables. In this case, I'm asking for 4 different mediation analyses. The outcome variable is listed to the left of the IND subcommand, and the distal variable that I want to do the mediation analysis on is listed to the right of it. So this is going to look at the relationship between the treatment dummy variable and the outcome latent social phobia, and it's going to do a complete mediation analysis of that. I also request, for reasons you'll see in the text, a mediation analysis between P-Skills 2 and the latent social variable post-treatment, as well as these others. Again, I lay out the logic for these in my book. Finally is the out command, and what I would like Mplus to print out. SAMP tells Mplus to print out some descriptive statistics. The standardize command tells Mplus to give me a standardized solution in addition to the unstandardized solution. The mod command tells Mplus to print out modification indices, but to only show me the modification indices that are greater than 4. The residual command asks Mplus to show you residual statistics. The C-interval command asks Mplus to show you confidence intervals. And Tech4 is technical output that I go over in the chapter. Alright, so this is the syntax that will run the program. And again, I go over that in more detail in the chapters, so if you want to read the text associated with the programming, that's probably better. Once I finish the syntax, I go up and I click the Run button, and Mplus will execute it. I'm going to save it. And then this is the output here. And I walk you through the output in Chapter 11. Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot.